everybody. Welcome to the 90th episode of the Manor Podcast. I'm your co-host, Roger Bodee, joined as always with my best friend and other co-host, Michael Hamilton. Michael, do you know what it's like raising a toddler?
I don't. I have kind of structured my life in a way that I will not have to find out what it's like raising a toddler, but tell me about it. Tell me what happens.
This is just going to turn into a weekly toddler segment, I feel like, for the foreseeable future until he stops toddling around and he gets less interesting, but we'll see. But it turns out that it's springtime, so the weather's nice. So Austin and I have been spending more time outside. And the first outside time we got him was this little like toddler slide. He loves the toddler slide. He'll throw things down the toddler slide, balls down the slide, slide 10 out of 10 toy. Love it. But it's the only toy we had. So I was like, we need a second toy around here. And I got him this little T-ball set, basically, and you can like hit the balls off the tee. And I figured, he doesn't have to be amazing at it. I'm not expecting him to be knocking out home runs or anything like that, but at least like be interested in it and like throw a ball and like whack it with a bat. And I get it out and he's like holding the bat upside down and like whacking balls somewhat. And he's just like, he doesn't want to hold it with two hands. He just kind of whacks it with one hand and then he puts it down within 5 minutes and just never cares about it again. And I believe somehow I am not raising a jock.
Really?
Yeah.
That's
shocking.
That is shocking. I wonder why. I wonder why he's not more
I don't know. Last week, it was the Darth Vader update. He loves Darth Vader and Star Wars, and he doesn't like sports baseball stuff. It's just like I can't fathom my son being like that.
Yeah. I think we actually know exactly where he gets it from, and I have a good story for our audience here. So there was about half a year ago or so, we were talking about what are some other things we can do. Actually, more than half a year. It was around when a little after we started playing Street Fighter, or before we played Street Fighter. It's like a year ago. Anyway, and I was like, what if we did like some sports? What if we went and played sports? And you're like, I don't really like the sports video games. I don't like 5 months stuff. And I'm like, I meant like actually go outside and play sports. But I just thought it was very funny that when I brought up sports, your initial thought was sports
like Madden. Games. Yeah. Well, everybody's got their thing, and just mine is not the sports ball. I played a lot of sports growing up, but I was never good at them. I never made varsity. I never did particularly well at any of all the sports I played at. I don't think I could ever pitch or hit a ball in baseball. I did not like beating people or like the whole football thing, football culture, bro culture of like tackling and all that stuff. Never my thing. I think the sport I liked the most was track and field, and I just did shot put and disc because I basically just got to like hang out outside and just like throw some stuff. And I was like, that's pretty cool. That was like my sport that I think I vibed with the most.
Yeah, I also did track and field, but I was doing the track side of things. I just ran. I got my little flimsy arms. I couldn't throw things very far.
I couldn't throw things very far either, but I just I tried anyways.
Yeah, I remember they had us try all the things anyway, and I like I don't think it was shot put. Did you throw like javelin equivalents in high school track and field?
We did not, but I knew of them.
Okay. I think I remember throwing it and I just like threw it and it went like nowhere. It's like, okay, I'm going to go back to running.
Yeah, fair enough. Well, ultimately, I'm excited to see Austin's skills at rolling dice and how he's going to fare at a craps table. I have to wait a while at something like that. But thankfully, you'll get a chance to demonstrate those skills coming up here soon at the Realms Level Up event with Clash Ground Alpha Clash Tournament. So thank you to the Realm for sponsoring this game and hosting amazing community events and making podcasts like this possible.
Yeah, thanks to the Realm for sponsoring us and what you said.
If you need cards for your Alpha Clash tournament in Las Vegas coming up soon, go buy them from the Realm Games. Give the Realm Games your money, and then they'll take that money, some of that money, not all that money, but some of that money, and they'll give it to us. So when you give your money to the Realm Games, you are giving money to Roger Bodee and Michael Hamilton. So just think about it like that,
Yeah. Okay. So, what are we talking about this week?
Alpha Clash, Clash Grounds, Las Vegas. You're doing things for it, right? You're going there.
Yeah, I am going there, and I've been testing a reasonable amount for it, trying to get ready to go play a tournament for a game that I've probably played 30 hours in my life or something, but they've been 30 productive hours.
I was watching Zach Bunn's Team Covenant stream from last week, and he was talking about this prep now too. And what odds do you think Zach Bunn said live on stream that you will win this tournament?
That I will win, or someone on the team will win?
That you will win. You personally, Michael Hamilton.
Like this is me guessing Zach's, not me guessing what my odds actually are.
Yeah. What did Zach say?
I would say Zach probably said like 40% or something crazy.
He said you're like 50-50.
Okay.
So no pressure. He did say no pressure right after that too.
Okay, that's good. The no pressure really takes away all the pressure.
So he has a lot of confidence in your ability to play this game. I have a lot of confidence in your ability to play any card game. So
I would definitely not give me 50% to win the tournament. Maybe 50% to top 8. That seems like potentially reasonable. I have put a lot of work into it, and I feel like the field as a whole is not super prepared, but it's kind of hard to be when there haven't been a lot of big tournaments to help prepare people. So at least that's what this podcast is, to at least get you on the right track for preparing if you're looking to go compete.
Yeah, take Michael Hamilton's odds of top 8 from like 50% to like 45% if you watch this episode.
Yeah. Wait a second. This is detrimental to my tournament results.
But it's just your magnanimous spirit of competition that you want to give out this information in the spirit of fairness, right?
No, I actually think if I was just trying to do the best I could at tournaments, I wouldn't be making a podcast about competitive games in the first place. I'd spend this time testing or consuming content, because I think consuming content is very helpful for preparing for things. But I think that overall, I like helping people out, and I think the games are in a better place because this content exists. So, yeah.
Awesome. Well, tell people how you have been preparing for this tournament then, and then how they should be preparing with the week that they have left.
So, the way I have been preparing is I've got Wolfpack teammates Zach and Ian, and the three of us have been meeting a couple of times a week, playing some Alpha Clash games, playing a deck that we're working on against what we kind of expect to be like the meta decks, or decks that, I shouldn't say meta, I don't think there's really going to be a meta, but the decks that we expect to show up a reasonable amount. So like Torque, Clarity, War, those are the main three that we expect. I think Machina might show up. I forgot.
Pestilence, Haven.
Oh, Haven. I don't think there will be a lot of Pestilence, and we'll get into that a little bit later, but I think Green's in a pretty bad spot right now.
Yeah, unlucky.
So I could be surprised, or I could be caught off guard. Someone could have a really sweet Pestilence deck that's actually very good. And I do think like Pestilence hero power is very strong, and a lot of his cards are very strong. They're just like not positioned very well in the meta game, because a lot of his good cards have 1 health, and 1 health is not very good against Torque's hero power.
No, it is not.
So where he can just exhaust himself to deal 1 damage to a Clash card, and if all your Clash cards have 1 health, they're just dying to his ability every turn.
Yeah, so basically you've been setting at Torque is just like the baseline tier 0 deck at the moment that you've been testing against.
Yeah, we think Torque will be both the most common and probably the, I don't know if best performing is the right way to say it, because there will be a lot of people, like if someone breaks something else, it'll perform proportionally better, especially if they're the only ones on it or a very small group of people are on it. But I think Torque, there will be at least a few Torques in the top 8, and Torque will probably be the most played deck. And I would say it's the strongest deck and the most known deck going into the field or into the tournament.
And why is that? What makes the deck so good?
So there's a few things. The biggest thing is Here Comes the Boom is probably the strongest card in the game right now. It's 4 mana to deal 5 damage to everything in play. There are not really very many, I guess there's basically no other sweepers in the game. There's no way to clean up multiple things efficiently, especially for as cheap as 4 resources. Red also has a really strong top end with 6 mana Flare, the 6/6 Flight unit, and the 7 mana Machina. It's a 6/6 Barrage too, so you get to attack with it and basically deal 6 damage to any Clash cards in play, and then you still get to attack for 6. It's a very strong card. And Flare, the 6/6 Flying or Flight that deals 2 to everything when it attacks. This is a really, really powerful top end, and it kind of makes a lot of board states that existed before these two cards came out kind of irrelevant. Flare cleans up all the little things and flies over most things, and Machina just kills your best thing when he attacks. So sometimes 2 things when he attacks. So I think having a strong sweeper combined with his top end is really powerful. And now these cards go in any red deck. They don't necessarily only go in Torque. But the reason that you want to play Torque with them is first, here comes the boom plus Torque's hero power. Can clean up 6 health things. So that 6/6 flying flare that I talked about, you can ping it with your Torque hero power and play Here Comes the Boom to take it out. And then I think the best 1-drops in the game are the White Haven, which irrelevant. Well, I mean, it's included in a lot of Torque decks. Not irrelevant, but not you can play any hero because or any contender with it. But the other one is Torque Uncontrollable or Torque the Uncontrollable. I don't know. It's a 1-mana 1/2. When it enters the battlefield, it deals 1 damage to you, and then anytime it would take non-clash damage. Instead, it gets plus X, where X is the amount of damage that it would take. So if you play Here Comes the Boom with your 1-mana Torque in play, it gets +5/+5 and becomes a 6/7. So you play Here Comes the Boom, you sweep away all their blockers, then you attack with your Torque. Sometimes you have 2 or even 3 of these little Torques out. I haven't seen 4 yet, but I'm sure it could happen. But if you have just 2 of these things, you play Here Comes the Boom, you sweep away their board, and you get to attack them with 2 6/7s. And the main reason you want to play Torque as your contender is that when you play this 1-mana Torque and it deals 1 damage to you, Torque's main ability is when he would take non-clash damage once per turn, you can draw a card. So you play this 1-mana Torque, and then it deals 1 damage to your contender Torque, and you draw a card. And that's really, really powerful. If you look at the other best 1-drop in the game, the 1-mana Haven, it's just a 1/2 that draws a card when it enters. And you're basically you're turning Torque into this card with a ton of upside with synergies with Here Comes the Boom, and even the Flare and Machina I talked with both can be used to pump up your 1-mana Torques as well.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so basically what I'm hearing is the Torque has the best early game and end game. It sounds like a strong place to be.
So I wouldn't say he necessarily has the strongest end game. I think Clarity kind of comes in there with her contender power, hero power thing, where Clarity is kind of like my pick as the deck that might prey on Torque, might be able to be built in a way to have a good Torque matchup. But basically each turn, instead of drawing or before you draw a card, you get to look at the top 2 cards of your deck, and you can essentially opt them to the top, the bottom, change the order. It's like opting 2 in Flesh and Blood, where you look at the top 2, you put them on top, you put them on bottom, put 1 in each spot, whatever you want to do before you draw. So in the late game, Clarity kind of gets this card selection where she doesn't have to draw these random, like, weaker early and mid game plays. She can just draw her top end pretty consistently with this ability.
Okay. Makes sense. Yeah, definitely the amount of card advantage that she gets. I think the tricky thing about that, though, is that in order to get that real strong late game card advantage engine going, she has to be at that 10 life. And given that there's no summoning sickness in this game, dying from 10 is pretty easy to happen on a lot of board states.
Yeah, so her second ability, when she's below 10 once per turn, you can look at the top 3 cards of your deck and put 1 in your hand, put the other 2 on top. If Clarity is able to stabilize at that 10 life point range, around 10 or 9, 10, even 7 or 8 is probably pretty good. You can just keep activating this, and turn after turn, just get a bunch of extra cards and also get some card selection. And if you're alive and you're choosing extra cards, it becomes pretty easy to win the game from there. So I think you do give a lot of agency to your opponent. They can kind of leave you around like 12 to 15 and then try to burst you down from there and just keep that ability from being turned on. But it is really powerful when it works.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So do you know what kind of Torque decks you want to play? What color combinations are popular, or what you probably don't want to go into what specific builds you're playing at the tournament. You're not that you're not prepping people to that level of degree, but are there just like generally known torque builds that you want to talk about?
Yeah, so the most common thing to pair with Torque, and honestly, Machina is also going in this direction too, is blue is a very common color to pair with it because you get access to this 2 mana Haven that when you play her, you can put a card from your hand into your resource zone. This lets you ramp into red's really powerful top end much quicker. Basically, a whole turn faster you get to the top end. And if you play 2 Havens, you can get there even 2 turns faster. It is kind of card intensive, but if you just, when you play a 6 mana flare on turn 4, a lot of the time it just wins you the game. You just attack with it, especially if you have a clash buff to protect it from them attacking it. They're just going to die. Save for playing Machina ahead of schedule. The 7 mana Machina, it just clears out their board and kills them very quickly. At 6 power, you start at 30 health if you're playing one of the 30 health contenders, and even less for some of the other contenders. So, yeah, I think blue will be is a very good color to pair with it and will be very common. Whether it's a 2-color red-blue deck or playing a third color, sometimes even 4 colors, that will be seen at the event. But blue is like kind of the go-to default for pairing with it. I think the other most common pair the other most common color to pair with it is going to be white. Getting access to another premium 1-drop in the 1-mana Haven is very good. The 3-mana kill spell Deliverance is a good answer to red's top end, and especially if your opponent ramps and you don't, and then they play the 6-mana flare ahead of schedule, then you can play just for 3 resources. You can play Deliverance on it and kill it. And yeah, you took 6 damage. Yeah, they wipe some of your board, but being able to cleanly answer it without having to attack into it is very important, because if you're trying to clear things out by attacking into them and your opponent has a clash buff, the defender gets clash buff priority. So if you attack with, let's say I attack with my 6/6 into your tapped flare, that's a 6/6. And if I play a clash buff, well, I guess it's more often comes up when the sizes are different, but basically if I don't have a clash buff as the attacker, or I have a clash buff that I want to save for something else, if I don't play a clash buff and you do play a clash buff, I can't then be like, oh, you played a clash buff, now I want to play my clash buff. The defender gets like the final say. And let's say I attack with a 4/5 or a 5/4 into your flare, and I'm like, okay, I need to attack, and then I need to play a clash buff to get over it. I can only play 1 clash buff. I can't play 2 to get even bigger. I just get to play 1, and then you can respond with your own, and then your card will just kill my card, and that's it. And all the damage falls away after the clash. All clash damage goes away. So I can't even attack it with one thing and then attack it with like a little 1-mana Haven to finish off the last damage that it survived with.
Yeah. So how many games do you think just come down to who draws more clash buffs then? Like, do you think the 0-cost clash buffs are proving to be as problematic as some people are making them out to be? Are they fun, swingy cards? Like, I guess like how have the clash buffs shaped your perception of the game at the moment?
So I don't think the clash buffs, like, I don't think a lot of games come down to who draws more clash buffs, unless you build your deck in a way that's like, I'm really going to struggle if my opponent draws clash buffs. If you're relying on killing units by attacking them, for example, with the card, there's a 3-mana Lin that has close combat. It's a 2/3, and it wants to be killing 1-mana Torques. It's a 2/3. It has close combat, so it can attack ready units. The main reason you would play that card is to kill a Torque. But the problem with that is, if you want to kill a Torque, now you need to play a clash buff proactively because you can't respond to theirs. Or if you don't play a clash buff, then they can play a clash buff, and that just kills your Lin for free, and you spent 3 mana and you traded for their card that cycled. So, and no mana.
Yeah.
So basically, I think that the way that decks are built and should be built, because how prevalent and common clash buffs are and how powerful they are, I think you just have to like really take them into account in terms of what deck you are bringing to the tournament and what cards you choose to include in your deck. If you basically register a bunch of this Lin or other units, like I think 2/3s are particularly quite bad right now because they lose to clash buffs on 1/2s. There's another 2-mana white Conquest that I think also looks very good until you remember clash buffs exist, and then this card's horrible. So I think if you're thinking about Clash buffs and you're not building your deck in a way that just will die to them, then I don't think they are as swingy or as game. Like, I don't think games come down to who draws Clash buffs the most or who draws the most Clash buffs. I think mostly it just means that a lot of cool cards that otherwise would see a lot of play and be pretty powerful and be interesting to build your decks around are just fairly unplayable, and you just shouldn't include them in your deck because of Clash buffs.
So I guess like then you get into another interesting point there where you're talking about like the ranges on which toughness on clash cards is kind of acceptable in the metagame. And torque also is a major limiter on that, given that if you have one toughness, like you just can't show up to the game, because as soon as you play anything that's one toughness, torque just says, okay, I'm going to ping you and you're dead and get out of here. So is that kind of the reason why green isn't as viable as it might otherwise be?
Yeah, so I think if you look at the green one drops, they have the Magnate. It's a 1/1 for one that on defeat you get a draw card. It's probably the worst of the 1 mana draw card cycle. I guess it's better than the 1 mana the 1 mana Blue Haven that is an 0/1 that you lose life and draw a card when she dies. So that's probably the worst one. But Magnate's the second worst. Then there's uh, Moxie at black that draws a card and is a 1/1 for one. It draws a card when it enters instead of when it dies. So that's just better than Magnate. You get the card right away. Though kind of very similar against Torque. And then there's the White Haven that's the best of the cycle. That usually it's a 1/2 that draws a card when it enters. So I think Magnate's it's fine. It's a 1/1 that will cycle, but it's just going to get pinged most of the time. And then the 1 mana Pestilence is a 2/1 that when it enters battlefield, you can give something -2/2. And if the portal is closed, you have to discard a card. So this card would be pretty good if it weren't for Torque's hero power, because getting a 2/1 that can kill something, you might need to open the portal in order to not discard a card, but sometimes it's worth discarding a card to answer their Torque, and then you can get ahead on tempo a lot there. But the fact that it just dies to Torque's hero power kind of makes it pretty bad. And then green also has a really cool 2-drop. It's a 2 mana Pestilence. It's a 1/1 that when it enters battlefield, you get something -1/-1 and draw a card. Now, this card is almost really good, but first, it's giving things -1/-1, which these 1 toughness or 1 health units are not. They're not. These 1 toughness, 1 health clash cards are not very playable because they're dying to Torque in general. So this guy has less targets to kill, and then he also has 1 health himself, so he gets pinged by Torque, and you won't get a chump block with him. So I think green's whole early game dying to Torque means it's in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, there's nothing that they really have access to that allows them to just like have a board on like the first 2 turns of the game, which is pretty problematic when like nothing has summoning sickness and you could just be beat down pretty hard.
Yeah, though actually I found that the early game, the chip damage you can get doesn't really matter that much, because the top end of things is like
So
so
damage
high
intensive.
power. Yeah, it's so high power, and everything attacks a turn it comes down. So like if I chipped you 3 times with my 1 power guy, my 1/2 Haven, and then you play 6 mana Flare 4 turns later, and you attack me for 6 and ping away my Haven, well, how much did that 3 damage matter? It's hard to know.
That's fair. Okay. So we talked about green struggles, Torque, clarity, and white, and then is blue the Haven backpack deck just not as strong as people are making it out to be, or what do you think that deck's issues are at the moment?
So I think the biggest issue with the Haven deck is that weirdly its goal is to play a bunch of cheap things and use them as chump blockers while it stalls to kind of get the backpack up to 25 counters. I think its biggest problem is the small things. You're not really able to effectively chump block a lot of the things you want to. The turn that you want to chump block the 1 mana Torque is a turn that they're pairing it with a Here Comes the Boom and clearing away all your chump blockers anyway, so it's going to attack you for a bunch. The 6 mana Flare has Flight, so it's just going to fly past all your chump blockers and possibly kill them all, depending on whether your backpack's gotten up to enough counters to give them more defense or not yet. but it will deal 2 damage to them all and potentially clear out some of them. And then the other issue that deck has is it doesn't really have a lot of good ways to charge the backpack after the 4 copies of the 2 mana Haven that it reveals the top card of your deck, puts it into your hand, and you lose life equal to its cost. And then you get to add 2 counters onto your backpack, and then your Haven will also trigger to add a 3rd counter to it. So that card's really good. I think if you could play 8 copies of that card instead of just 4, I think the deck would be very, very scary. And I think actually the best builds of Haven are looking at recurring that 2 mana Haven to re-trigger its ability multiple times or more times than you should normally be able to. The problem is the deck isn't, at least the problems I ran into when testing it, is the deck isn't very consistently able to do this. And if you get to a late game, or if you get like later in the game, if you don't have ways to charge the backpack, you're just going to eventually die. And your cards are all reasonably weaker than your opponents, and your hero power is generally weaker unless you're actually winning the game from the backpack.
Yeah, and you don't get any of the 0 cost clash buffs. You get an interesting clash buff that's +0/+2 and draw 2 cards. You do have to pay a resource for it, but unfortunately, it only lasts a single attack instead of the entire turn, like other clash buffs do. So it's good at drawing cards, and it's good at preventing some higher damage attacks at times, but only being for that one attack and costing a resource just makes it look nowhere near as powerful as the 0 cost ones.
Yeah, it actually gives 3 defense and draws 2 cards. So yeah, it is very powerful. I think if it lasted the whole turn, it would be potentially problematic, because if your opponent has a board of like 3 or 4 things and you play this on your Haven, suddenly you're just like blanking anything with less than 4 attack, and the things that are more than that are just like barely chipping in. So yeah, I think the fact that it only lasts 4/1 clash was very heads up from the design team. And I wonder if they tested a version of it where it lasted the whole turn and it was just like leading to game states where you just couldn't kill the Haven because you just play this clash buff and have infinite health or defense for the whole turn.
Yeah, that's fair.
So yeah, I think the clash buff is fine power level wise. 1 resource to draw 2 is very, very good. Probably better than 0 resources to draw a card. But the +3 for 1 clash instead of the whole turn is a lot weaker than like the +2/+2 for the turn.
And draw a card, yeah.
And even if you look at the +2/+2 draw a card clash buffs that exist, they are used on your contender a decent amount to save life. Like if your opponent's going to attack you with 3 things, then you might want to just slam your clash buff on your contender and save 6 life basically.
It's pretty good value out of a card.
For 0 resources and draw a card and save 6 life. Great.
Woohoo.
We paid 3 mana for gain 6 draw a card back in my Magic days.
Yeah. So is the other issue that kind of happens with like the swinginess of the game is that like there's not really good ways to interact with your opponent on their turn at the moment, right? There's trap cards, but do you want to talk about some of the issues that kind of happen with trap cards?
Yeah, so I think trap cards have a couple issues. So one, when you play a trap card, you don't spend the resources on it. You just put it face down in your accessory zone. And then they each have like a trigger condition, like trigger or counter attack or counter play. And the counter play ones specifically are usually countering a specific type of card being played or a resource cost on it or something like that. And they generally line up fairly reasonably for you if your opponent does the thing that like triggers the condition of the trap. But because there are not that many traps that people would put in your deck, your opponent can kind of like narrow down to just a couple traps that it could be. And they can kind of change their plays to play around it. So one trap that I think is fairly reasonable and has a low opportunity cost is Sharpshooter Moxie. It's a black trap. It costs 1, and you counterplay it when your opponent plays a clash card that would cost 1 or 2. And instead of that card entering play, it just goes to Oblivion instead. And you have to leave up a single black resource to hold up this trap. You can't like front pay the cost. So you put this trap face down and your opponent sees you put it down. and they're looking at their 1 mana card in their hand and they're like, maybe I'll just resource this instead of play it. And then they resource it, and then it goes back to your turn. And now you have the Sharpshooter Moxie face down in your accessory zone. And you can't pick it up and resource it now that you saw your opponent skip their first turn and resource their 1 cost. It's just stuck there. So if you want to spend all of your resources to play something on turn 2 or turn 3, then now your opponent's like, oh, my opponent spent all their resources. They can't activate their trap now. Now I'll play my 1 cost or 2 cost. And if you keep holding up the resources, your opponent can still play around it and not play their cheap clash cards, or they can maybe they play their worst one first, and if you counter that one, then they get to play their actual good 1 cost that they wanted to play. And if you don't counter the first one, well, then they got to play their thing, and you had your trap and it just didn't do anything again. So there's a lot of ways to play around traps. There's some other ones that are like counter attacks that are kind of similar. You play this trap and your opponent can be like, well, you left up your 2 resources for the blue -3/-3 counter attack. I'm just not going to attack with my 2/3 or my 3/3, and you won't get to use your trap.
Yeah, so then you're just spending a whole turn cycle not using your resources, which is really bad, it turns out.
Yeah, so if you play that and they're like, okay, I'll just spend all my resources, play a big clash card, and then pass, not attack with it, and just be ahead in board development, then now you're behind on board. So if you want to play something to catch up, you're going to have to tap all of your resources, and then that trap can't be used again because you spent all your resources to do something, so they can attack freely now. So because of that, I think traps are a little bit awkward. You can't ever pick them back up and resource them once your opponent plays around them a little bit, because they do effectively buy you that space by making your opponent's turn awkward, but then your opponent can just resource around it. And because
and
cards
buy them space by making your turn awkward.
yeah. So I think if there ever is a deck that is getting so much card advantage that it doesn't care, it just needs to not die, then traps are probably reasonable in that. But I don't think any of the decks are really getting far enough ahead on cards that they don't care if they have to put a card face down and then trade basically their turn in a card for your turn. That's just not a winning trade in the long run. And a lot of the time it's not going to get your whole turn. It's just going to make your turn a little bit less optimal than it would be otherwise.
Yeah, that's fair. And then I guess quick play cards kind of solve this issue of having to like commit the card face down, but then they still have all the same issues of you're not spending your resources or playing your cards or doing anything on your turn. So if your opponent doesn't do the thing that triggers your quick play card, you still just aren't doing anything, which isn't a very powerful strategy to be employing in the game. So they do have the benefit then, at least then you can like resource them on a future turn cycle because they're not face down in your accessory zone, but still they're just not usually powerful enough to warrant slots at the moment, right?
Yeah, I think quick play cards are inherently a lot stronger than traps. The fact that you're basically getting the same thing without having to commit the card ahead of time, you just commit the resources, means that they're just reasonably stronger than traps. You can also have like multiple quick play cards in your hand, choose which one to play, which one to resource next turn based on what your opponent does. And rather than if they were both traps, you have to commit both of them and then you only get to activate one. And then then the other one's just stuck in your traps or your accessory zone. So quick play cards are definitely stronger than traps. The problem is the development team knew this, and so they made all the quick play cards weaker than the traps in terms of like what the actual effects are. So one that I think sees a decent amount of play, at least I've seen it in a lot of lists, and I've definitely included it in some of my decks, is Lefty's Last Stand, where it's a counter attack. It's a quick play card, and you basically you make it so the attacking clash card does no clash damage this turn, whether it's attacking a contender, attacking another clash card, or whatever. It's just not going to deal any damage. It costs 2 resources, a blue and 1, and I think that's a pretty good example of a quick play card being weaker than a trap, because if the same resource cost, you can give their attacking thing -3/-3 for 1 and a blue, versus this quick play just preventing the damage it would deal. The -3/-3 actually can kill things, and a lot of the time it's not going to deal that much more than 3 damage anyway, so you're not saving that much more life on this thing. But yeah, I think that quick play cards are playable in small numbers, and it's also less face up when you have one, because maybe you just didn't have a way to spend all of your resources on your turn. That could happen a decent amount in the game, unless your opponent like knows you have a 2-drop in your hand. When you spend 4 of your 6 resources to play a 4-drop and you pass, then That doesn't look that suspicious.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess it makes sense from like an initial set. It's a new game, and if you're going to put the power into cards, you probably want the cards to be more proactive than reactive. You don't want games to go on for forever. You definitely want people to be able to like win and games end and have more quick engaging experiences with your game. So I get why the quick play and trap cards are kind of toned down at the moment, but I think they are potentially toned down too much where a lot of games kind of feel like they snowball really quickly and there just really wasn't some and very much you could do about it a lot of the time.
Yeah, I do think it's kind of important that games end at a reasonable pace because my understanding of tournaments is they're 2 out of 3 and they're 50 minutes. And I think like that's kind of how Magic worked. But in Alpha Clash, you make a lot more decisions than you do in an average game of Magic because every card can be a resource or a card you play, similar to Flesh and Blood, where you all your cards are either pitch cards or block cards or attack cards. Well, Alpha Clash, they all do 2 things at least. So versus in Magic, where most of your things do one. So I think the extra time on choosing which cards to resource and which cards not to means that games need to end in a probably lower average number of turns in order to keep the same pace of games finishing because there's just more decisions you're going to be making.
Do you think that means that's just like hard control strategies are just never going to exist in this game?
I don't know. I think that it's hard for a hard control strategy to be super good right now because everything being able to attack the turn you play it is really good against defensive decks. I think the closest things to hard control we have is probably Clarity or Haven, where Haven's trying to just turbo out her alternate win condition and basically essentially fog you until she gets there with chump blockers and her clash buff, just prevent you from dealing damage to her, not actually trying to answer your whole board. And Clarity is trying to answer your board long enough to just kill you too. And because she wants to be in that danger zone in that below 10 life before she starts getting a lot of card advantage. And if you're below 10 life, or even if you're drawing a bunch of cards, eventually your opponent's just gonna, I can't remember the name of it. There's a red deal 3 damage spell. They just play
Yeah, I know
3 of
about,
those and kill you if you just let them draw 10 more cards before you finish them off.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if we'll ever see hard control. It'll probably require the life gain to get a little bit stronger in the game because I think right now there's not a lot of very good life gain effects. I think the 2-mana Haven's probably the best one. The 2-mana White Haven that you can either draw a card or gain 2 life when you play her. I think that card's very good. But outside of that, there's not a lot of good life gain that exists.
Or cards that are better, like overstatted or something like that, but can only block or something like that. Like better ways to defend might go a long way as well. Defending in this game already is kind of awkward because you have to engage your card when you defend with it. So that means it's only defending that one time on that one attack, one, and then two. Now that it's engaged, it's now vulnerable then to be picked off by another card that can come down and attack it again. So the combat damage doesn't stack turn over turn, but I think the having to engage in order to defend is a significantly higher cost than it might otherwise be in other games.
Yeah, I think it's pretty reasonable that you have to engage to defend. I think it would be like pretty annoying.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's like
thing,
bad, but I'm just saying like it makes defending just intrinsically like trickier, I guess.
Yeah. I do think there are some good advantages to defending. The biggest being that you get clash buff priority, so your opponent has to make their clash buff decision before you do. So I think being on the defensive side is very good in terms of that. And the clash buffs do last the whole turn. So if you block something or obstruct something.
Well, I guess if you're playing a good hero, they do.
the clash buffs that you should be playing at this tournament. No, I actually think War is probably okay. And I think Haven might
War's
be good.
clash buff lasts the whole turn. It just can't target contenders.
Oh, okay. So you're right. It does. Okay. So I forgot where I was going. There are some reasons to defend.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's like horrible, like you should never defend ever. I'm just saying the mechanics of the game right now do not incentivize defending outside of a clash buff interaction. And I just think it also means that since you don't have summoning sickness, that means you also gave up an attack with that card. And since attacking is usually so good in the game, that means you then, and so it kind of plays into that whole trap dynamic again, where if I leave my card back to defend and not attack you, and then you don't attack me, then like my card just didn't do anything that turn cycle. And it's not like there's cards where it's like, okay, if this is untapped or something like that, you get some kind of reward or benefit or something like that. And there's no cards that really have activated abilities where like, oh, after your opponent like on your end step or something like that activated. That's not really how this game works mechanically. So giving up that attack and then also having the future attack considerations of your opponent's turn cycle, making that card vulnerable, just I think fundamentally lead to the awkward dynamics of trying to like block in this game.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And the fact that it's so hard to like leave a way to protect your blocker up because like traps and quick plays have the problems that we talked about before. It just, yeah, you're pretty incentivized to be attacking a lot. And then on top of that, a lot of the best cards in the game have pretty good attack triggers.
Yeah. There's lots of on attack do a thing. There's not a lot of there are some cards that are like when this blocks or whatever do X, but most of the time it's like when this blocks or when this is untapped, get like some small marginal benefit to your power and toughness. And it's like, okay.
Yeah.
And other parts are like when this attack deal 25 damage, create X 1/1s where X is the number of damage you've. It's not that I'm being hyperbolic, but like the attack triggers are really good.
Yeah, there's a conquest. It's a 1/6, and when it obstructs, it gets +2 power. And I was really excited about this card, and I thought I'm gonna break it by putting this card in my deck so I can block real well. And then I read Here Comes the Boom and Torque Hero Power, yeah. And I'm like, oh, that's 6 damage.
Should have been a 1/7.
My guy just dies.
Yeah.
So I don't think that card is very good, unfortunately.
Yeah. And I think that's like the premier blocker in the game at the moment. Like I can't think of a card that's like better at blocking than that card.
Yeah. I think honestly the best blockers are just the ones that get your value and then you chump block them.
Yeah.
Chump block with them. Because
the cards that draw a card and then block.
Yeah, there's not a lot of breakthrough in this game. Which basically you're dealing damage to the opponent's contender equal to the difference between your power and their defense. So because of that, most of the time chump blocking is fairly effective, but there is a lot of ways to clear out blockers before you attack.
Yeah, and even the 7-mana Machina, right? He clears out chump blockers as he attacks, and the 6-mana Flare clears out chump blockers, and then there's Flight. There's lots of good ways to get your attacks through, and there's not a lot of good ways to prevent those attacks. Because even if like, I think there's a black card called Surprise, which is like cost 3 as a quick play, and then it's like destroy target card after this combat phase. So it's like it gets all the damage through, gets all its attack triggers, does all of its things, and then like you just eat it, and then you then trade 1-for-1 for your opponent, which is not a very good deal. But I think that's like one of the premier like quick play removal spells.
Yeah, there's another one that you send one of your own cards to Oblivion to send their attacker to Oblivion that costs 3. But the problem with that is this trigger happens after the attack triggers. The trigger attacks happen. So if you have you got your little Moxie, you want to send Oblivion to kill their big attacker, and they play their 6-mana Flare and attack with it, and then that clears out all your 1 and 2 defense things. So before you get a chance to use this trap, it's like, dang, unlucky.
Yeah. So at the point where like, I think they could just put blue or just XX, whatever color they want to be the control color in this game. I guess it could be like black, like counter spell in this game. I think it'd be fine.
I don't think so. I think that would be too good.
Really? Just for that card? Do you think that would be too good?
Well, I mean, it depends what your goal is, but if it answers a spell of any cost for 2 mana, then like it's just so flexible. You play this trap, you leave up 2 resources, and
well, it's just Clash card, I guess. Like, so it wouldn't counter like Clash Grounds or like Clash buffs or stuff like that, but like counter any like Clash card, blue.
Yeah, I still think that's probably too strong for the game. I haven't done a lot of testing with hypothetical cards. I'm not really developing cards on it, but I would expect that to be too good. I would think it would have to be something like if the portal is open, do it, or that way your opponent can play around it by closing the portal, or counter a thing with like a specific cost, like maybe it's like blue counter a clash card with cost 5 or greater, and then your opponent's like, oh, they left that blue, I can't jam my giant things here, I gotta play something smaller, because otherwise if like the counter play around that would be like playing your 4-drop instead. But if you just have counter anything and I'm like, well, you have that, I guess I'll play my smaller thing, you can still just counter my 3-drop or 4-drop, and that's still a very tempo positive play for you.
Yeah, but I guess like my thought process behind giving a power level to like an answer more so is that like since the threats and the summoning sickness and like there's still the cost of leaving open the resources, like it still has all of the flaws of like everything we've been talking about. It's just stronger on its effect, and it's not like I'm saying like it needs to like counter spell, draw a card or something like that, or like give you insane rewards for doing the thing. I just think I guess my overall thing that I'm advocating for is that for answers or potential things to interact with your opponent to be a little stronger. Do you think that's unreasonable?
Yeah, I don't think that's unreasonable, but I think the card you're presenting is not a little stronger. It is like strong enough that it
fine, Michael. I'll take the next 5 hours to design the perfect Alpha Clash.
I'm just saying. I think that card specifically, the way you worded it, it sounds like it would be like very, very shifting to the meta. And
oh yeah, I think it'd be good. I think it'd be playable and shift the meta. I agree. That's why I proposed it.
I think it would be very, very strong and change a lot about Alpha Clash. But that's fine. That yeah.
Okay. Any final Alpha Clash thoughts before you begin wrapping up your testing and heading to Viva Las Vegas?
Viva Las Vegas, huh? I am really looking forward to this tournament. I think it's going to be a great time. I don't know. Alpha Clash is sweet. I would recommend it if you haven't tried it. If somehow you listen to this whole episode and haven't played the game yet, I think that there's a new set coming out this weekend. We're going to play some sealed too. I have done no sealed testing. I don't know how I would do sealed testing, but well,
you don't even know the whole set yet, right?
Yeah, I don't. But we
I don't think anybody does.
Some spoilers.
Yeah, I don't think the full spoiler is out yet.
But I guess I'm more so I haven't played any Alpha Clash Limited really, except when we did like a whole booster box sealed against each other.
Yeah, that did not work out very well. That was one of the most miserable TCG experiences I've had in my life.
It was with a product that wasn't designed for sealed also. So
yeah. So that's not a knock on like Alpha Clash. That's a knock on like us attempting to fit a square peg in a round hole. Cause like you opened like a Haven deck with the backpack and just had like this like do nothingist control deck. But like, so you got to Haven's ability, and then I had to like somehow engineer a way to do the game, but like you weren't winning the game actively while like denying me resources. So like you weren't winning and I wasn't playing the game. So like the game just wasn't functional. Yeah. I felt like for like a long time in the end game. So that's potentially a concern for control cards. I get it, but yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, because I didn't have any way to like turbo out my backpack, but I did get below 12. I'm going to keep using Haven's ability if you wanted to stockpile cards. So
I couldn't. So like just the board was locked down. I had like no board answers or anything like that. I had like nobody had flying or breakthrough or evasion, so everything was just like locked down. I was just like, okay, like
yeah, that's fun.
So looking forward to a good designed limited product, that's for sure. Okay. Well, the next time you're playing Alpha Clash in Las Vegas, always remember, mind your manners.